On the morning of May 20th, 2012, my life took an unexpected turn. A few friends and I were returning to where we were camping for May long weekend when we lost control of our vehicle, rolling several times along the gravel road. 2 weeks later, I emerged from a medically induced coma in the pediatric intensive care unit at Saskatchewan's Royal University Hospital, having no idea where I was, what had happened, or why I couldn't move or breathe on my own. One of my injuries was a cervical spinal cord injury, which means that if I were a computer, I shredded through the circuitry in my neck. So my brain can't tell my legs to kick, my fingers to wiggle, or my bladder to wait a minute when it's time to go. The moment I awoke from my coma marked the start of my life as someone viewed by the world as disabled. Many people think the first year or two after acquiring an injury like mine is the hardest, assuming this difficulty is a direct result of the injury. I argue that living in a body that is seen as disordered becomes more difficult every day. And the reason for this difficulty has little to do with the injury. The difficulty comes from trying to live in a world that does not welcome or value us as we are. Let me share a story to illustrate what I mean by an unwelcoming world. I was strolling through the mall one day, and two young women stopped me. They asked to talk to me, something not out of the ordinary since acquiring my injury, so I reluctantly stopped and asked what they would like. They began talking to me about their faith and asked if they could place their hands on my legs and pray for me to be healed. Luckily for them, I believe in nonviolent approaches to conflict. So I swallowed my discomfort and tried to make it a teaching moment. I asked what they meant by healed. They looked puzzled, gazing at my legs and each other awkwardly. I continued, saying that I don't need prayers for my body to be healed. It already is. This is my body healed, and there's nothing inherently wrong or bad about it. Wanting to be respectful, I let them stumble awkwardly through a prayer, minus the hands on my legs, because no one needs to be that nice. I left that interaction reminded again that my body, as it exists, remains unwelcome unless it can be fixed. These young women, like many of us, had a hard time having this conversation because my answer didn't align with every mainstream story regarding ability and desirability that they've been taught. The message of these stories being that for our bodies to be welcome, desirable, and deserving of participating in all aspects of life, we must conform to the normative body. This body is the current social standard that defines how bodies should look, perform, and behave. We're told at an early age that we can be either able or disabled, straight or gay, independent or dependent, leaving no room for a spectrum of experience to explore, embrace, and learn from. The result is a ranking of bodies based on perceived differences, gatekeeping who is considered worthy and desirable of being heard. I call them singular stories. When society's dominant narrative of normal bodies becomes the standard, and diverse stories that don't follow the norm are silenced. Under these stories, disability becomes a site of pity, inspiration, or burden, rather than a complexity, resilience, or even a value. After my spinal cord injury, I formed a whole new understanding of identity because my lived experience wasn't pitiful or burdensome as I'd been told that it would be. Nor did I think simply getting out of bed and being happy in the morning now made me inspiring. But the rich degree of knowledge I began to develop from experiencing changes in my body and hearing more diverse stories was disregarded most of the time. Reduced to labels, I was now the eternal child, or the tragic victim, or the inspirational supercrip. No more or less complex than that. These singular stories allow for cultures of undesirability to go unchallenged and systems of oppression to flourish. They are why I can't go to the dentist, get x rays, or even have a regular pap smear without the help of a caregiver who is also capable and willing to lift me because the infrastructure and staff are not in place. They're why we continue to have a healthcare system that traumatizes people requiring support, their loved ones, and often the actual support staff due to a lack of staffing, infrastructure, and education. I lived in long-term care facilities for 7 years, and it was such a dehumanizing experience that when I think of having to go back without a system overhaul, I seriously consider assisted suicide. Not because my body sucks or my life sucks, but because the system sucks. These singular stories are why people still ask if I can have sex or try to regulate my ability to be a parent. In fact, rather than being incapable or undesiring of intimacy, disabled bodies can teach us valuable lessons for improving sex lives by redefining intimacies in ways that support the creation of practices that enhance pleasure, build deeper connection, and reduce shame. And I can say that from my own personal experience. These singular stories are why I can't go for an afternoon stroll alone in my neighborhood without people asking if I'm okay or near home, because a disabled person could never do so safely alone, right? They're why people still feel entitled to grab my chair and begin pushing me without my consent, being upset with me when I'm irritated by their actions rather than thankful. I ask all of you, if someone came up behind you and began carrying you, ignoring you when you asked them to let you go, how do you think you would feel? Would it feel violating, uncomfortable, maybe frustrating? Yeah, I can confirm that it kind of does. We internalize these singular stories and begin to feel shame for not meeting the unattainable standards set out in this normative body, often experiencing lower self-worth. When I initially resisted using a power chair, my thought process had less to do with whether I would benefit from it and more related to a fear of looking too disabled. Without realizing it, fitting into the superior binary identity outlined by society began to feel compulsory. Being taught that my worth depended on my being able, I refused to appear more disabled than I necessarily had to. So I insisted on staying away from any power options, refusing to admit that I may even benefit from one. And this happens in other areas of our lives as well. They're the driving force behind why your loved ones, experiencing changes in their mobility, fight you about using a cane or a walker, even though it's obvious they need it when they are leaning on every object in the house to get from one room to another. Or why so many have no problem discussing taking medications unless they're designed to support your mental health. An aspirin for a headache? Sure, no problem. An antidepressant for depression? Not a chance, right? The shame we feel to fit the mold results in us denying our own needs rather than being vulnerable about our experience to build connection and foster understanding, self-love, and knowledge. The shame I'm talking about is that voice in the back of your head that tells you that you're too much or you're not enough, too thin or too fat, too queer or not masculine enough, too extroverted or too introverted, too disabled. These singular stories of desirability have become so baked into our minds that we don't even consider how misguided they are. The normative body has been used to convince us that identity is fixed and natural. In reality, all bodies and coinciding identities are constantly changing, messy, and dependent on others, and they are being shaped by the cultures that we live in. Acquiring a spinal cord injury and being pushed into the disability community has shown me not only how inaccurate the normative body is, but also how embracing diverse experiences can cultivate connection, self compassion, and incredible new ways of knowing. For example, non disabled adults have been convinced that they are entirely independent, with dependency being devalued. We label those who are obviously dependent as burdensome. As my example of your loved one's refusal to use a cane demonstrates, there is currently a stern unwillingness to accept dependence. However, acquiring my injury has shown me that interdependence is a part of life. We are all dependent on each other and the environment to survive and flourish. Even though I was labeled disabled and therefore dependent, I noticed that others still depended on me. My family needed me to heal from the trauma of almost losing me. My friends still reached out for support with their stresses in life. My partner still needed my guidance on how to cook meatballs. Granted, they were frozen, but still. An entire staff of people relied on injuries like mine to have a job. Yes, you may have showered yourself this morning, but who provided you with the water and the infrastructure? You may have made your lunch today, but who taught you how to make it? You see, we are dependent on something or someone without even knowing it. After my spinal cord injury, I saw the mutuality in relationships like I never had before, especially when it came to the caring relationships I had with my personal supports. I realized that I was not a burden. Caregiving, far from being a burden, has shown me the radical beauty of interdependence. In positive caregiving relationships, personal assistants and I operate as extensions of each other. There's a give and take dynamic to meet both of our needs that mirrors interactions between spouses, coworkers, and friends. I use specific sheets in bed, even though they make me uncomfortable, because they help my support assistants move me more easily. Even though they hate mornings, they come in early to get me up in time to make it to class. I need to voice when I'm having a bad day, so my support doesn't take my mood personally, and vice versa. My circle of support and I laugh and learn together often. Some of my most cherished people and most meaningful moments come from my support circle. Having to voice my needs and ask for help in such vulnerable ways, I'm now open and assertive while still being appreciative in other areas of my life. I have taught so many in my support circle about adaptive technologies, spinal cord injury, and disability justice, while so many have taught me about the immigrant experience, different cultures, the science of my body, and how meaningful kindness can be. We have the potential to provide each other new perspectives to enrich our lives and a deeper sense of empathy and compassion. I'll never forget the beautiful nightmare that was trying to put my my grad dress on, in which my support and I laughed through the pain of getting me in my chair without flashing my undies all night. You can see the final result in the photo behind me. The quote beside the image is part of my prior assistant's response to me when I asked her for consent to use this image in my talk today. She said, "Truly one of my fondest memories in my career as a whole is you." I talk about how pivotal that was for me. I can never tell you enough how special it was to be invited into your space. Ashley, like many of my prior assistants, keep in touch because we built a genuine relationship that continues to hold meaning for the both of us. The time I had an awful reaction to a medication, going into a full-blown anxiety attack, and my nurse took the time to rub my legs and talk with me until the reaction subsided. The comical disaster that was trying to get me home from the emergency room and back to the hospital the next day with a full-length cast on my leg after I broke my femur. Thank goodness for duct tape, stools on wheels, and ingenuity, because my leg was not going to bend. Behind me on the screen is an image of our collective ingenuity. My semi-regular morning chats that I have with one of my current regular support assistants that always continue even after their shift is done. In my experience, my support circle and I shape each other's lives in profound ways. Well, I am so grateful I have been given this platform today to speak, and I believe that my voice matters. I embody the typical disabled subject that has historically been given a larger platform to talk about ability in society, which means that our collective understanding of human experience is far too limited. The wisdom of those with bodies classified as disabled are incredibly different depending on their disability. The experience of disability also shifts when merged with identities like queerness or depending on ethnic or cultural background. All identity constructions are deeply interconnected. Gender is linked to disability, which intersects with class, sexuality, and race. These aspects are intertwined, making it imperative that we listen with an openness to diverse stories that reflect the full range of human experiences to create counter-narratives and dismantle cultures of undesirability. You've started by listening to the counter-narratives in my stories today. Now it's important you continue listening to those who are marginalized in society tell their stories. I refuse to let systems of oppression shame me into silence and isolation, nor will I allow these systems to continue misguiding me into doing the same to others. I call on all of us to reject these flawed systems that devalue bodies and instead begin embracing interdependency and the disorderliness in all of us while valuing diverse embodiments. By doing so, we can build a more compassionate and just world rooted in equity, community, and inclusivity. Together, we can reimagine a future that affirms the beauty and wisdom inherent in every body. Thank you so much.